The engines of the Gulfstream G650 were humming at 40,000 feet, but nobody on board could hear them. The only sound filling the $10 million cabin was the blood-curdling scream of an infant. In seat 1A sat Adrian Thorne, the most feared man in the New York underworld, holding the child like it was a ticking bomb. His knuckles were white. His patience was gone. When his head of security reached for a silencer to solve the noise problem, a woman in the back of the cabin stood up. She wasn't rich. She wasn't armed. But what she was about to do would either get her killed or change the fate of the most dangerous crime family in history. The flight from JFK to Zurich was supposed to be silent. That was the rule. On board the chartered jet, the air smelled of bergamot and chilled circulated oxygen. The leather seats were stitched by hand in Italy, and the champagne chilling in the bucket cost more than Sarah Jenkins's car. Sarah sat in seat 8F, the very last row, clutching her worn-out handbag against her chest. She didn't belong here. She knew it, and every other passenger knew it. She had only secured the seat because the commercial flight had been overbooked, and a bizarre bureaucratic miracle, or perhaps a curse, had bumped her onto this semi-private charter managed by Obsidian Air. She was flying to Zurich for a final interview for a governess position, her last-ditch effort to save her childhood home from foreclosure. But the silence was broken 20 minutes after takeoff. It started as a whimper, then a cry, and finally, a wail that sounded like physical agony. At the front of the plane, blocked from view by a partial partition, sat a man whose back was stiff as iron, Adrian Thorne. Even in the dim light, he radiated a terrifying kind of power. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit that fit him like armor. His dark hair was swept back, revealing a face that could have been carved from marble. Handsome, but cold enough to freeze water. In his arms was a 6-month-old baby, Leo. Leo was the sole heir to the Thorne legacy, the orphan left behind after Adrian's brother and sister-in-law were liquidated in a car bomb attack 3 days ago. Adrian, a man who dealt in lead and ledger lines, had no idea what to do with a human life. "Make it stop," Adrian growled, his voice vibrating through the cabin. He held the baby awkwardly, far away from his chest, as if the infant were contagious. "Sir, I've tried the bottle. He refuses it," said Marcus, Adrian's chief of security. Marcus was a giant of a man, a scar running through his left eyebrow, his jacket bulging where his shoulder holster sat. "The pilot says we can't land for another 6 hours." "I don't care what the pilot says," Adrian roared, standing up. The baby screamed louder, turning a dangerous shade of violet. "By the airport if you have to. Just silence this child." The other passengers, 3 businessmen avoiding eye contact and a nervous older woman clutching her pearls, shrank into their seats. They knew who Adrian Thorne was. You didn't look the Wolf of Manhattan in the eye, and you certainly didn't offer him parenting advice. Sarah watched from the back, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was a pediatric nurse, or she had been, until the hospital layoff 6 months ago. Her instincts were screaming louder than the baby. That wasn't a cry of hunger. That was pain. "He's colicky," Sarah whispered to herself, gripping the armrest. "Or it's the cabin pressure. His ears aren't popping." Adrian was pacing now. The baby's screams were jagged, breathless. The tension in the cabin was so thick it felt like the oxygen was being sucked out. "Give him to me," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal timbre. "I'll take him to the back galley. I'll make him quiet." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Marcus wasn't going to hurt the baby, surely. But the look in his eyes was one of pure, ruthless efficiency. He just wanted the problem gone so the boss could think. Adrian looked at the screaming bundle, then at Marcus. For a split second, he looked ready to hand the child over, just to end the sensory torture. Sarah's body moved before her brain gave permission. The sound of the seatbelt click was deafening in the sudden lull of the baby's breath. Sarah stood up. She was wearing a thrift store blouse and comfortable slacks, looking nothing like the high-fashion models Adrian usually kept company with. "Sit down," Marcus barked, his hand twitching toward his waist. "No," Sarah said. Her voice shook, but she forced her feet to move. 1 step, 2 steps. She walked up the aisle, entering the lion's den. Adrian turned, his ice-blue eyes locking onto her. "Who are you?" "Someone who knows what they're doing," Sarah said, stopping 3 feet from him. "He's in pain, and you're making it worse." The cabin gasped. The older woman with the pearls covered her mouth. Nobody spoke to Adrian Thorne like that. Adrian stepped closer, towering over her. He smelled of expensive scotch and gunpowder. "Do you have a death wish, little lady?" "I have a wish for that baby to breathe," Sarah shot back, pointing at Leo. "Look at him. He's turning blue. He's holding his breath from the screaming. If he doesn't calm down in the next 60 seconds, he could pass out or rupture a vessel." Adrian looked down at the child. The baby was indeed turning a terrifying shade of dusky blue, his mouth open in a silent scream. Panic, raw and unfamiliar, flickered in the mob boss's eyes. "Give him to me," Sarah demanded, holding out her arms. "Touch the air, and you lose a hand," Marcus warned, stepping in front of Adrian. "Let the baby die, and you lose your boss's respect." Sarah countered, not looking at the gunman, keeping her eyes glued to Adrian. "I'm a nurse. Let me help him." Adrian stared at her. He saw fear in her brown eyes, yes, but he saw something else, too. Resolve. A maternal ferocity that matched his own violence. "Stand down, Marcus," Adrian said quietly. "Boss, she's a civilian. We don't know who sent her." "I said stand down," Adrian roared. He looked at Sarah. "You have 2 minutes. If he isn't quiet, you're going out the emergency hatch." He didn't mean it literally. They were at cruising altitude, but Sarah knew that once they landed, her life would be forfeit if she failed. She stepped forward and took the baby. The moment Sarah touched Leo, she felt a rigid tension in his tiny body. He was stiff as a board, his abdomen hard and distended. She didn't cradle him normally. That was the mistake Adrian had been making. "What are you doing?" Adrian asked, his voice sharp as a razor. Sarah ignored him. She flipped the baby over, laying him stomach down along her forearm, his head resting in the crook of her elbow, his legs dangling on either side. It was a classic hold known as the tiger in the tree, excellent for gas and colic, but to the untrained eye of a Mafia don, it looked like she was dangling him like a sack of potatoes. I said, "What are you?" "Shh," Sarah hissed at the most dangerous man in New York. "He needs vibration." She began to hum, not a song, but a low, resonant drone deep in her chest. She walked the small space of the cabin, bouncing gently on her heels. Her free hand rubbed firm, circular motions on Leo's back, right between the shoulder blades and down to the lower back. The cabin watched in stunned silence. Marcus still had his hand near his jacket. Adrian watched like a hawk, analyzing every muscle movement Sarah made. For 30 seconds, Leo continued to sputter. Then a loud, distinct burp echoed through the luxury cabin. The baby's body instantly went limp on Sarah's arm. The screaming cut off as if a switch had been flipped. Leo took a shuddering, wet breath, and his eyes, wet with tears, blinked open. He looked at Sarah, then closed them, burying his face into the cheap fabric of her sleeve. Silence returned to Flight 402, but this time it wasn't tense. It was peaceful. Sarah kept swaying, turning to face Adrian. He swallowed air during takeoff. It got trapped. It feels like a heart attack for an infant. Adrian stared at the sleeping child, then at Sarah. The adrenaline that had been pumping through his veins slowly receded, leaving him exhausted. He looked at the woman properly for the first time. She had messy brown hair, tired eyes, and fraying cuffs on her shirt, but she held his nephew with a natural grace that money couldn't buy. "You," Adrian said, pointing a finger at her. "What is your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Jenkins." "Sarah Jenkins." He tested the name, rolling it around his mouth. "You're a nurse?" "I was. Until recently." "Why are you on my plane?" "I got bumped from economy. It was this or wait 2 days." She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "He needs to stay like this for another 20 minutes to ensure the gas doesn't return. Do you want to hold him?" Adrian recoiled slightly. "No, he prefers you." "He prefers comfort, Mr. Thorne. You were holding him like a grenade. Marcus scoffed. Watch your mouth. It's fine, Marcus. Adrian waved a hand, dismissing the guard. He sank back into his leather seat, rubbing his temples. He gestured to the empty seat opposite him. Seat 1B. Sit. Do not take him back to the cheap seats. I want him where I can see him. Sarah hesitated. This was too close. Being this close to Adrian Thorne was like sitting next to a nuclear reactor. But the baby was sleeping soundly, his little fist gripping her collar. She sat down, careful not to jostle him. You have a way with him, Adrian said, his voice lower now, stripped of the public growl. He poured himself a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He didn't offer her one. My brother, he didn't leave an instruction manual. Babies dictate the manual, Sarah said softly. You just have to learn their language. And you speak it fluently. Adrian took a sip, his eyes never leaving her face. You said you were a nurse. Why past tense? Sarah stiffened. Hospital budget cuts. Liar, Adrian said. He didn't say it angrily, he said it as a fact. People with your skill set don't get fired for budgets. They get fired for liability. What did you do? Sarah looked away, out the oval window where the clouds were turning purple with the setting sun. I stopped a doctor from administering the wrong dosage to a preemie. He was a senior attending. I was right, but I broke protocol by physically stopping his hand. He had tenure. I had a cardboard box to pack my desk. Adrian paused, the glass halfway to his mouth. A slow, predatory smile touched his lips. It didn't make him look nice. It made him look dangerous in a different way. You broke the rules to save a life. You disregarded authority because the authority was incompetent. I did what was right, Sarah said defensively. In my world, Sarah Jenkins, Adrian said, leaning forward, loyalty to the outcome is worth more than loyalty to the rules. Suddenly, the plane lurched violently. Sarah gasped, clutching Leo tighter. The crystal glass on Adrian's table slid off and shattered on the floor. Turbulence? Sarah asked, her eyes wide. Marcus was already at the cockpit door, his earpiece pressed deep into his ear. He turned back, his face pale. Boss, Marcus said, his voice tight. It's not turbulence. We've lost the port engine. And the radar just picked up 2 bogies. Interceptors. Adrian was on his feet in a second. The exhausted uncle vanished, replaced by the warlord. He pulled a hidden panel on the wall open, revealing a rack of assault rifles. Who? Adrian demanded. The Volkovs, Marcus replied. They didn't wait for us to land. They're trying to force us down over the Alps. Sarah sat frozen, the baby sleeping against her chest, as the plane dipped sharply to the left. Sarah! Adrian barked. She looked up, terrified. Can you strap that baby to you? What? Strap him to you! Now! He threw a silk scarf at her from the overhead bin. Tie him tight. We are going to make a very rough landing, and if you drop him, I will kill you myself before the crash does. Where are we landing? She cried, fumbling with the scarf, tying Leo securely to her torso. Adrian looked out the window at the snowy peaks rushing up to meet them. We aren't landing, Adrian said, racking the slide of a pistol. We're falling. Brace yourself. The world did not end with a bang, but with a tearing screech that sounded like the sky itself was being ripped open. The Gulf Stream clipped the top of a pine ridge, shearing off the right wing. The cabin spun violently. Inside, gravity ceased to exist. One moment, Sarah was in her seat. The next, she was pinned against the ceiling, then slammed back down against the bulkhead. Keep his head down! Adrian's voice roared over the deafening noise of shearing metal. Sarah curled into a fetal ball, her entire body acting as a human shield around little Leo. She felt the silk scarf cutting into her waist, holding the baby tight against her stomach. She screamed, but she couldn't hear herself. The cabin lights exploded, plunging them into a strobe-lit nightmare of sparks and rushing wind. The impact was brutal. The fuselage hit the snowy slope and slid. It groaned, twisted, and tumbled, plowing through trees that snapped like matchsticks. Snow and dirt sprayed into the cabin through the torn hull. Then, silence. Absolute, ringing silence. Sarah gasped, Inhaling freezing air, her vision was blurry. Something warm was trickling down her forehead. Leo. She scrambled to check the bundle tied to her chest. The baby was silent. Panic, colder than the alpine air, seized her heart. She fumbled with the blanket, pulling it back. Leo blinked. He let out a small, confused whimper, but he was moving. He was alive. "Everyone out! Move!" Adrian's voice cut through the daze. He was already up, kicking open the emergency exit door, which was jammed against a snowbank. His suit was torn, his face smeared with soot, but he was moving with terrifying speed. He grabbed Sarah by the arm, hauling her up. "Is he alive?" "Yes," she choked out. "Go. Run for the tree line. The fuel tanks could go." Sarah stumbled out into the snow. It was deep, up to her knees. The cold hit her like a physical blow. She looked back. The plane was a mangled wreck of twisted aluminum and wires. The cockpit was crushed. The pilot and co-pilot there was no way they survived. "Marcus!" Adrian yelled, diving back into the wreckage. Sarah stood shivering in the snow, rocking Leo, who had started to cry from the shock of the cold. She looked up at the sky. It was gray, heavy with impending snow, but she could hear the distant drone of another engine. The Volkov plane. They were circling to see if anyone survived. Adrian emerged from the broken fuselage, dragging Marcus. The giant security chief was groaning, his left leg dragging uselessly behind him, the bone clearly broken. "Move!" Adrian commanded, hoisting Marcus's arm over his shoulder. They scrambled toward the density of the pine forest, fighting the deep snow. They made it 50 yards before a massive whoosh echoed behind them. The jet fuel ignited. A fireball mushroomed into the sky, heating their backs and illuminating the darkening forest in a grim orange glow. They didn't stop. Adrian led them deep into the trees, forcing a brutal pace until the wreckage was just a glow in the distance. Only then did he drop Marcus onto a bed of pine needles. "Check him," Adrian ordered Sarah, his chest heaving. He pulled his handgun, checking the magazine. He had 12 rounds. Sarah fell to her knees beside Marcus. The big man was pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the freezing temperature. "It's a compound fracture," Sarah said, examining his leg. The pants were torn, and she could see the bone pressing against the skin, threatening to break through. "He's going into shock. We need to immobilize it and keep him warm." "We can't stay here," Marcus gritted out, his teeth chattering. "Volkov, they'll send a ground team to confirm the kill. They saw the fire." Adrian looked at the darkening woods. He looked at Sarah, shivering in her thin blouse, and the baby wailing against her chest. He took off his ruined suit jacket and draped it over Sarah and the baby. "Keep it," he ordered when she tried to protest. Underneath he wore a white dress shirt, now stained with oil and blood, and a shoulder holster. "I run hot." "Where do we go?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "We're in the middle of nowhere." "Not nowhere," Adrian said, his eyes scanning the terrain. "I know this flight path. We crashed near the Swiss-Italian border. There are old smuggling routes through these valleys. Smugglers use hunting cabins." "And if there isn't one?" "Then we dig a hole and die," Adrian said bluntly. "Can you walk?" "Yes." "Can you help Marcus?" Sarah looked at the giant man. She weighed 130 pounds. Marcus weighed 250. "I can be his crutch on the good side." "Good." Adrian hauled Marcus up. "I take point. You two follow my tracks. If I say, down, you drop flat. Do not ask why." "Just drop." They began to walk. The snow began to fall harder, erasing their footprints seconds after they made them. It was a race against the cold, and the wolves, both the four-legged kind and the ones carrying Kalashnikovs, were closing in. 2 hours later, night had fully descended. The temperature had dropped to 10 degrees below zero. Sarah couldn't feel her feet. Her loafers were soaked through, useless against the alpine terrain. The only thing keeping her moving was the heat of the baby against her chest and the sheer terror of stopping. Marcus was fading. He was heavy, leaning more and more of his weight on Sarah. Every step was a grunt of agony for him. "Boss," Marcus wheezed. "Leave me. I'm slowing you down." "Shut up, Marcus," Adrian said from the front, hacking a path through thick brush. "I don't leave my men." You have the air. You have the girl. I'm dead weight. I said, shut up. Sarah struggled under the weight. We need to stop, Adrian. Leo is getting too cold. He's crying. It's getting weak. That stopped Adrian dead in his tracks. A weak cry meant hypothermia was setting in. Lethargy was the precursor to death. He turned around, his face a mask of grim determination. He looked around desperately. The moonlight reflected off the snow, illuminating a ridge about 100 yards up. There, Adrian pointed. It was barely visible, a shadow against the darker shadow of the mountain. A structure. It's a slope maintenance shed, Adrian assessed. Or a hunter's blind. Come on. The last 100 yards were torture. Sarah slipped twice, burying her face in the snow, screaming silently as she scrambled to keep Leo from being crushed. Both times, Adrian was there instantly, hauling her up by the scruff of her neck like a mother cat, his grip bruising but secure. They reached the cabin. It was a rough log structure, half buried in a drift. Adrian kicked the door in. It was empty, smelling of stale wood smoke and dust. But it was dry. And in the corner, a cast-iron wood stove. Clear, Adrian announced. He helped Marcus to a dusty mattress in the corner. Wood, Adrian said to Sarah. Check the box next to the stove. I'll secure the perimeter. Sarah found dry logs and kindling. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely strike the matches found in a tin on the mantel. But finally, a flame caught. She fed it, blowing gently, until the fire roared to life. The heat was salvation. She unwrapped Leo. The baby was pale, his lips slightly blue. Sarah stripped off her wet clothes and stripped Leo, holding him skin to skin, wrapping them both in a moth-eaten wool blanket she found on a shelf. Come on, little guy, she whispered, rubbing his back. Warm up. Adrian came back inside, shoving a heavy wooden table against the door. He turned and saw Sarah, shoulders bare, clutching the naked baby, shivering violently near the fire. He stopped, his gaze lingering for a moment on the curve of her neck, the fierce protectiveness in her posture. He looked away, focusing on Marcus. How is the leg? Adrian asked. Bad, Marcus gritted out. It's swelling inside the skin. Compartment syndrome, maybe. Sarah turned, clutching the blanket to her chest. Let me see. She shuffled over to Marcus. The leg was angry, red and tight as a drum. We need to reduce the swelling, Sarah said, her nurse mode overriding her exhaustion. And we need to set the bone before the muscles spasm too tight. If we don't, he'll lose the leg, or the shock will kill him. Do it, Adrian said. I need a splint. And something for the pain. I don't have morphine. Adrian pulled a silver flask from his inner pocket. It had survived the crash. He unscrewed the cap. 18-year-old single malt. It's the best anesthesia you're going to get. He handed the flask to Marcus, who took a long, desperate pull. Adrian, Sarah said, using his first name without thinking. I need you to hold him down. When I pull the bone into place, he's going to scream. He can't move. And the baby? Adrian asked. Leo is warm. He's sleeping. Sarah placed the baby in a makeshift nest of blankets near the fire. She looked at Adrian. This is going to be brutal. I've seen brutal, Adrian said softly. He moved behind Marcus, pinning the big man's shoulders to the mattress. Do it. Sarah grabbed Marcus's ankle. She took a deep breath. She had set bones in the ER, but never in a dark cabin with a Mafia don watching her, her hands numb from cold. On 3, she said. 1, 2. She pulled, hard. Marcus didn't scream. He let out a guttural, animalistic roar that shook dust from the rafters. His body bucked, but Adrian held him fast, his muscles straining against the white shirt. There was a sickening pop as the bone aligned. Marcus went limp, passing out from the pain. Sarah slumped back, gasping for air. Her hands were covered in sweat and grime. She looked up and found Adrian watching her. He wasn't looking at her like a nurse anymore. He was looking at her like she was a miracle. You have ice in your veins, Sarah Jenkins, he whispered. I had to help him, she whispered back, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. Adrian moved away from Marcus and sat next to the fire, opposite her. He began to clean his gun, the metallic clicks the only sound in the room. "Why?" he asked suddenly. "Why? What?" "Why did you help? On the plane, you stood up to me. Here, you saved my man. You're a civilian. You should be cowering in the corner." Sarah looked at Leo, sleeping peacefully now, his cheeks pink from the fire's warmth. "Because he's a baby," she said, "and because I know what it's like to lose everything, to be helpless." Adrian stopped cleaning the gun. "The foreclosure. You mentioned it on the plane." "My parents' house," she said, staring into the flames. "It's all I have left of them. My dad built the porch. My mom planted the roses. The bank wants to take it for a debt that isn't even mine. My ex-husband. He forged my signature on a loan before he ran off." She laughed bitterly. "That's why I was going to Zurich. A rich family needed a nanny. The pay was enough to stop the bank." Adrian looked at her, this woman who was fighting for a house while he fought for an empire. It seemed so small, yet to her, it was her entire world. "You won't make the interview," Adrian said. "I know." Tears pricked her eyes. "I've lost the house. I know that." "No," Adrian said firmly. He holstered the gun and leaned forward, the firelight dancing in his blue eyes. "You kept my nephew alive. You saved my head of security. Thorn debts are always paid, Sarah. If we get off this mountain, you won't just keep your house. You'll own the bank." Sarah looked at him, startled. "I don't want your money. It's not charity. It's a transaction. I just want to survive," she whispered. "Then, stay close to me," Adrian said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, almost touching a smudge of soot on her cheek. The air between them crackled, charged with adrenaline and something hotter, something dangerous. "I will burn this entire mountain down before I let them touch you." Sarah's breath hitched. For a moment, the cold, the crash, the killers. It all faded. There was just the fire, and the man with the eyes of a wolf promising her safety. Crack. The sound was sharp, distant, but unmistakable. Adrian froze. His hand snapped away from her face and went to his weapon. "What was that?" Sarah breathed. "A twig snapping," Adrian hissed. "Someone is outside." He stood up, extinguishing the lantern, plunging the room into darkness lit only by the dying embers of the stove. "Get in the corner," he commanded. "Behind the woodpile. Cover the baby's mouth." "Adrian? Go!" He moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. Outside, in the snow-covered clearing, shadows were moving. Not animals. Men. Dressed in white camouflage, moving with tactical precision. The Volkovs had found them. Adrian turned back to Sarah, his silhouette framed by the faint moonlight. "There are 6 of them," he whispered. "I have 12 bullets. Sarah, listen to me closely." She clutched Leo, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would wake the baby. "If they breach the door," Adrian said, pressing a small backup knife into her hand. "You don't hesitate. You aim for the neck. Do you understand?" "I can't kill anyone," she sobbed softly. "You are a mother tonight," Adrian said, his voice fierce. "A mother does whatever is necessary." He turned back to the door, raised his weapon, and waited. The handle of the cabin door slowly, silently, began to turn. The door handle clicked. The latch lifted. For a heartbeat, time suspended in the frozen cabin. Sarah held her breath, her hand clamped over her own mouth, pressing Leo's face into the soft wool of the blanket to muffle any sound. The fire in the stove popped, a sound like a gunshot in the silence. Then Adrian moved. He didn't wait for the door to open fully. He didn't wait for a target. He fired 3 rounds through the wood of the door. Thwack, thwack, thwack. A gargled cry echoed from outside, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the porch. "Contact!" a voice screamed in Russian. The silence shattered. Automatic gunfire erupted, shredding the wooden walls of the cabin. Splinters flew like shrapnel. Sarah curled tighter into the corner behind the woodpile, shielding Leo with her own body as bullets punched through the logs, sending puffs of sawdust into the air. "Stay down!" Adrian roared. He was a blur of motion, rolling across the floor to change position, firing methodically. He wasn't spraying bullets like the men outside. He was conserving them. Every time he pulled the trigger of his customized Sig Sauer P226, silence followed from a specific direction outside. But they were flanking. Glass shattered as the window to Sarah's left was smashed in with the butt of a rifle. A soldier in winter camouflage began to climb through, his face masked, eyes cold and dead. Adrian was engaged at the door. Marcus was unconscious. Sarah was alone in the corner. The soldier saw her. He raised his rifle, the black barrel pointing directly at her and the baby. Sarah didn't think. She didn't calculate. The nurse part of her brain shut down, and the primal mother took over. Beside her, the cast-iron stove was glowing hot. On top of it sat a heavy iron kettle of boiling water she had prepared for Marcus's bandages. As the soldier swung his leg over the sill, Sarah grabbed the handle of the kettle with her sleeve-covered hand and hurled the boiling water directly into his face. The man screamed, a high, horrific sound that cut through the gunfire. He clawed at his melting mask, dropping his rifle. Adrian spun around, seeing the threat. He put one bullet in the man's chest, silencing him instantly. The body slumped backward out the window into the snow. "Good girl," Adrian gritted out, reloading his magazine. "Now get ready to run." "Run where?" she cried, her voice cracking. "They're everywhere." "Not everywhere, listen." Sarah listened through the ringing in her ears. The gunfire outside had stopped. Instead, she heard the revving of engines. "They brought snowmobiles," Adrian said, his eyes gleaming with a reckless plan. "They expected to kill us and ride out. Now we take their rides." "Marcus can't ride!" "Then we strap him down. I am not dying in this shed, Sarah. Are you?" She looked at Leo, who was wide awake now, eyes wide with the reflection of the dying fire, strangely silent, as if he knew crying meant death. "No," she whispered. "I'm not dying. Grab the medical bag. Grab the baby. When I open this door, you sprint for the machines. Do not look back. Do not stop." Adrian moved to the door. He took a deep breath, his back muscles tensing under the stained white shirt. He kicked the door open. 2 men were waiting by the snowmobiles, 50 feet away, their weapons raised. But they expected a cowering victim, not the Wolf of Manhattan. Adrian dove out, firing as he fell into the snow. 2 shots. 2 bodies dropped. "Go, go, go!" Sarah sprinted. The cold air burned her lungs. The snow dragged at her feet. She clutched Leo so tight, she feared she might bruise him. She reached the first snowmobile, a sleek, black Yamaha military model. Adrian was behind her, dragging Marcus across the snow with superhuman strength. He threw the unconscious giant onto the back of the second sled, using a bungee cord from the cargo rack to lash Marcus's hands to the handlebars. "Can you ride?" Adrian yelled over the engine noise as he jump-started the second machine. "I grew up in Wisconsin," Sarah yelled back, jumping onto the first sled. She placed Leo inside her coat, zipping it up halfway so only his head poked out, protected by her scarf. "Follow me! Stay in my tracks!" Adrian gunned the engine. The machine roared, its treads biting into the ice. Sarah slammed the throttle. As they peeled away from the cabin, bullets zipped past them, kicking up sprays of snow. More lights were appearing in the woods, reinforcements. They raced into the darkness, the headlights of their stolen machines cutting through the alpine night, leaving the burning cabin and the bodies of the Volkov assassins behind in the red-stained snow. They rode for an hour, navigating a terrifyingly narrow smuggling trail that hugged the side of the mountain. To their left was a sheer rock wall. To their right, a drop into a black abyss. Sarah's hands were frozen into claws around the handlebars. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a bone-deep chill that made her teeth chatter uncontrollably. Leo had fallen asleep against the vibration of the engine, his warmth, the only thing keeping her core temperature from plummeting. Adrian signaled to stop. They had reached a small plateau, a dense cluster of fir trees providing cover from the air. The silence that followed when they cut the engines was absolute. The wind had died down. The stars were out, indifferent and cold. Adrian immediately went to Marcus. The big man was conscious again, groaning softly. "Status," Adrian demanded, checking Marcus's pulse. "Alive," Marcus wheezed. "Leg feels like fire." "Fire is good," Adrian said. "Ice is bad. Keep feeling the fire." He turned to Sarah. She was still sitting on the snowmobile, staring blankly ahead, shivering violently. Adrian walked over to her. He didn't speak. He simply reached out and unzipped her jacket, checking the baby. Leo was warm. Then he put his hands on her face. His palms were rough, calloused, but incredibly warm. "Look at me," he commanded softly. Sarah looked up. Her eyes were hollow. "I threw boiling water on a man. I burned his face off." "You saved my life," Adrian said firmly. "You saved Leo. You did what was necessary." "I'm a nurse," she whispered, a tear freezing on her cheek. "I heal people. I don't." "You are a protector," Adrian interrupted. "Tonight there is no difference." He pulled her off the snowmobile and pulled her into a hug. It was shocking. The most feared man in the underworld, hugging a frantic woman in the middle of the Alps. He held her tight, sharing his body heat, his hand stroking the back of her head where her hair was matted with snow. For a moment, Sarah let herself fall apart. She buried her face in his shoulder, smelling the gunpowder, the sweat, and the expensive cologne that still lingered. She felt safe. It was an illusion, she knew, but for 10 seconds she let herself believe it. "We need to move," Adrian said, pulling away reluctantly. "We need to find a way to contact my people, but first—" His face hardened. The tenderness vanished, replaced by the calculator. "First, we find out how they found us." "They saw the fire," Sarah said, wiping her eyes. "No," Adrian shook his head, pacing in the snow. "The Volkovs were waiting. They shot us down at the exact coordinate where the radar blind spot ends. They knew the flight path. They knew the alternate landing zones. And they found that cabin too fast." He walked over to the snowmobiles and began ripping open the saddlebags. He checked Marcus's pockets. He checked his own gear. "What are you looking for?" Sarah asked. "A tracker. A digital handshake. Someone is broadcasting our position." He pulled out his own phone and smashed it against a rock. He took Marcus's sat phone and snapped it in half. "It's not the phones," Adrian muttered. "They were encrypted by NSA-level tech. It has to be a physical beacon." He turned his eyes to Sarah, or rather, to the baby strapped to her chest. "The diaper bag," Adrian said. "Give it to me." Sarah handed him the expensive leather bag they had salvaged from the wreckage. Adrian dumped the contents onto the snow. Bottles, diapers, wipes, a silver rattle. He ripped the lining of the bag open with his knife. Nothing. He picked up the silver rattle. It was heavy. Too heavy. With a grunt of effort, he smashed the silver rattle against the rock. It cracked open. Inside, nestled in the hollow space, was a small, blinking black chip. Sarah gasped. That was a gift. Adrian's face went white. A look of pure betrayal crossed his features, more painful than any bullet wound. "From who?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Sarah said. "It was in the bag when I took it." "It was a gift from my brother's lawyer," Adrian said, his voice turning into a growl. "Arthur, the man who handles the estate. The man who knew the flight plan." He threw the chip into the deep snow and stomped on it, shattering the electronics. "He sold us out," Adrian said, looking at the horizon. "He wants the inheritance. With Leo gone and me gone, control of the Thorn Trust reverts to the executor. Him." He looked at Sarah, a dark realization dawning on him. "You understand what this means, Sarah? That we can't trust anyone?" "It means I can't call for extraction," Adrian said. "Any number I call, Arthur will see. If I call my pilot, my soldiers, my safe houses, he will know. He will send the Russians." He walked over to her, gripping her shoulders. "We are ghosts now. No backup, no money, no extraction team coming to save us." Just us, on this mountain, with half the Russian Mafia hunting us and my own organization compromised. Sarah looked at the vast, empty darkness surrounding them. She should have been terrified. She should have been hysterical. But something had changed in the cabin. When she threw that water, when she felt the weight of the baby against her heart, the fear had burned away, leaving only a cold, hard resolve. "We don't need an army," Sarah said, looking Adrian in the eye. "We have you." Adrian stared at her. A smirk, dark and dangerous, tugged at the corner of his mouth. "And we have you, Nurse Jenkins," he said, "the woman who brings knives to gunfights." He looked at Marcus, who was watching them with glassy eyes. "We need to get Marcus to a hospital," Sarah said. "Real surgery, not whiskey and a prayer." "There is a town in the valley." Adrian pointed to a cluster of yellow lights miles below. "St. Moritz. It's a playground for the rich. Where there are rich people, there are private doctors who don't ask questions." "And there are cameras," Sarah noted. "We blend in," Adrian said. "We steal a car. We find a doctor. And then—" He looked back at the smashed rattle in the snow. "Then I go back to New York, and I kill everyone who had a hand in this." Sarah corrected him. Adrian paused. "What?" "We go back," she said fiercely. "You said the bank was going to take my house. You said if I helped you, I'd own the bank. I'm not leaving until I get my payment, Mr. Thorne. And I'm certainly not leaving Leo with a man who thinks a rattle is a good toy for a teething baby." Adrian laughed. It was a short, rusty sound, as if he hadn't used it in years. "Deal," he said. He mounted the snowmobile. "Hold tight. The descent is steep. And Sarah?" "Yes?" "If we make it through tonight, call me Adrian." She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her cheek against his back. "Drive, Adrian." They plunged down the mountain, racing toward the lights of St. Moritz, toward civilization, and toward a war that was just beginning. St. Moritz glittered like a diamond necklace dropped into the snow. The resort town was a haven for billionaires, oligarchs, and royalty, the perfect place for three fugitives to disappear in plain sight. They abandoned the snowmobiles in a ravine 2 miles out and hiked the rest of the way. By the time they reached the outskirts, Marcus was drifting in and out of consciousness, his massive frame supported entirely by Adrian. "There," Adrian whispered, pointing to a sprawling chalet with dark windows. "That's the Weber residence. Dr. Elias Weber. He used to patch up skiers who didn't want their insurance premiums to go up. He owes me a favor." They broke in through the garage. Sarah watched, clutching Leo, as Adrian hot-wired a vintage Land Rover Defender with the same ease he'd used to change a diaper earlier. They drove the car right up to the front door. Dr. Weber, a balding man in silk pajamas, opened the door with a shotgun in hand. When he saw Adrian Thorne, soot-stained, bloodied but unmistakable, he lowered the weapon, his face draining of color. "They said you were dead," Weber stammered. "It's all over the news. Flight 402, no survivors." "Do I look dead, Elias?" Adrian growled, pushing past him, dragging Marcus. "I need an operating theater. Now." For the next 4 hours, Sarah became a nurse again. She scrubbed in, assisting Dr. Weber as they removed bone fragments from Marcus's leg and plated the fracture. She worked with mechanical precision, her fatigue locked away in a box in her mind. It wasn't until the final stitch was placed and Marcus was sedated in a guest room that she allowed her hands to shake. She walked into the chalet's opulent living room. Adrian was standing by the window, watching the sunrise over the Alps. He had showered and found a suit of Weber's that fit him poorly, but he still looked like a king reclaiming his throne. "He'll walk again," Sarah said softly. Adrian turned. He held a glass of water out to her. "You saved him. Again." Dr. Weber did the hard part. "No," Adrian shook his head. "Weber did it for fear. You did it for loyalty. There is a difference." He walked over to a table where a laptop was open. "I've been looking into your debt, Sarah. The foreclosure." Sarah stiffened. "It's not important right now." "It is," Adrian said, his voice dark. "Your ex-husband borrowed money from a shell company called Apex Holdings. They are the ones foreclosing on your parents' house." "So?" Apex Holdings isn't a bank, it's a money laundering front. Adrian turned the laptop screen toward her. It's owned by Arthur Penhaligon, my lawyer, the man who put the tracker in the baby's rattle. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The cruelty of fate was dizzying. The man who tried to kill them was the same man destroying her life back home. He didn't just want my empire, Adrian said, his eyes cold as liquid nitrogen. He's been bleeding the city dry for years, preying on people like you. He used your ex-husband's gambling addiction to steal your family home. Adrian closed the laptop with a snap. We are going back to New York, Sarah. How? If we show our faces at an airport, he'll know. We aren't going to the airport, Adrian said. Weber has a Cessna in the hangar. We fly to Paris. Then we take a cargo flight. We arrive in New York not as passengers but as ghosts. And then what? Adrian walked over to her, tilting her chin up with his finger. Tomorrow is the memorial service for my brother. Arthur will be there. He'll be announcing himself as the interim trustee of the Thorne estate. He thinks he's won. He's wrong, Sarah whispered, feeling the fire of his touch. We are going to crash the funeral, Adrian promised. But I need you to do one last thing, the most dangerous thing yet. What? I need you to walk in first. The Cathedral of St. Patrick, New York City, 3 days later. The rain fell in sheets, washing the grime off the Manhattan streets. Inside the massive cathedral, the mood was somber. Hundreds of mourners, politicians, rival mob bosses, socialites, filled the pews. At the pulpit stood Arthur Penhaligon. He wore a mournful expression that practiced years of legal deceit had perfected. It is with a heavy heart, Arthur intoned into the microphone, that we say goodbye to the Thorne legacy, a tragedy, an accident, but we must look to the future. As the executor of the trust, I vow to. The heavy oak doors at the back of the cathedral creaked open, heads turned, a murmur rippled through the crowd. Walking down the center aisle was a woman. She wore a simple black dress, soaking wet from the rain. In her arms, she carried a bundle wrapped in white. Sarah Jenkins kept her head high. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she didn't falter. She stared straight at Arthur. Arthur froze mid-sentence. He adjusted his glasses. He recognized her, the nurse from the manifest. She was supposed to be a charred corpse on an Alp. Stop that woman! Arthur shouted, his composure cracking. Security! 2 large men in suits stepped into the aisle to block her. I wouldn't do that. A voice boomed from the shadows of the vestibule. The security guards froze. Adrian Thorne stepped out of the darkness. He was dressed in a black suit sharp as a blade. He walked with a predator's grace, stepping up beside Sarah. The silence in the cathedral was absolute. It was as if the Grim Reaper himself had walked in. Adrian? Arthur whispered into the microphone, the sound echoing like a plea for mercy. But the crash. You missed, Adrian said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried to the vaulted ceiling. He walked past the stunned guards, leading Sarah and Leo to the front. He climbed the steps to the pulpit. Arthur stumbled back, tripping over his own feet, terrified. Adrian took the microphone. He looked out at the sea of faces. The judges he owned, the rivals he tolerated, the family he protected. My lawyer tells you that the Thorne legacy is dead, Adrian said calmly. He tells you that an accident took my family. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the smashed remains of the silver rattle. He held it up. This was found in my nephew's bag, a tracking device, planted by the man standing behind me. The crowd gasped. Flashbulbs began to pop. Arthur Penhaligon didn't just try to kill me, Adrian continued, his voice dropping to a lethal register. He tried to kill him. Sarah stepped forward, pulling the blanket back to reveal Leo's face. The baby, sensing the moment, let out a loud, healthy cry that echoed through the church. The air was alive. And, Adrian added, turning to look at Arthur, who was now shaking violently, he stole the home of the woman who saved us. Adrian nodded to the side entrance. The doors burst open. But it wasn't security. It was the NYPD High Crimes Unit, led by a captain who owed Adrian a life debt. Arthur Penhaligon, the captain shouted. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and fraud." As they dragged the screaming lawyer away in handcuffs, Adrian didn't watch. He turned to Sarah. The cathedral erupted into chaos, reporters shouting, people standing, but in the center of the storm, Adrian and Sarah were an island of calm. "You did it," Sarah breathed, bouncing Leo. "We did it," Adrian corrected. He took the baby from her, holding Leo confidently now, the awkward uncle gone, replaced by the patriarch. Then, right there in front of God and the entire New York underworld, he took Sarah's hand. "The bank has been acquired," Adrian said softly. "I bought the controlling stake this morning. Your parents' house is yours. Deed is in the mail." "Thank you," she cried, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "That's all I wanted." "Is it?" Adrian asked. He stepped closer, invading her space, his blue eyes searching hers. "Because I find myself in need of a permanent governess. And a partner. And frankly, Sarah, I don't think I can sleep without knowing you're in the next room." "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Thorne?" she teased, her voice trembling. "I'm offering you the world, Sarah," he said. He leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was a claim, a promise, a seal on a contract written in blood and snow. When they broke apart, the crowd was cheering. Or maybe they were just stunned. It didn't matter. Adrian turned to the microphone one last time. "The funeral is canceled," he announced, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips as he looked at Sarah and the baby. "We're having a christening instead." 6 months later, the house in Wisconsin looked better than it ever had. The porch was repaired, the roses were blooming, and the foreclosure sign was long gone, used as kindling for the fireplace. But Sarah wasn't in Wisconsin. She was on the terrace of the Thorne penthouse in Manhattan, looking out over the city that now bowed to her husband. Leo was crawling on the expensive Persian rug, chasing a new toy, a soft plush wolf. Adrian walked onto the terrace, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. He kissed the sensitive spot on her neck. "The jet is ready," he murmured. "Paris for the weekend?" "Only if we fly commercial," Sarah joked, leaning back into him. "Never again," Adrian chuckled. "I bought the airline. The pilots are all former Navy SEALs now." Sarah turned in his arms, resting her hands on his chest. She looked at the man who had been a monster to the world, but a savior to her. "You know," she said softly, "they call you the Wolf of Manhattan." "I know." "They're wrong," she smiled, looking over at baby Leo. "You're just a big, protective dad." Adrian kissed her forehead, pulling her close as the sun set over their city. "Only for you, Mrs. Thorne! Only for you!" The nightmare on the plane was a memory. The cold of the Alps was gone. But the bond forged in the ice would last forever. They were a family. And God help anyone who tried to touch them now. Wow! What a journey! From a crashing plane in the Alps to a dramatic showdown in St. Patrick's Cathedral, Sarah and Adrian proved that loyalty is thicker than blood. Sarah didn't just save a baby. She melted the heart of the most dangerous man in New York and reclaimed her own life in the process. It's a reminder that sometimes the hardest moments in life, like a crying baby or a lost job, are actually the beginning of your greatest adventure. Did you enjoy this Mafia romance saga? If you loved the twists, the action, and the romance, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next thrilling story. And tell me in the comments, would you have thrown the boiling water, or would you have frozen in fear? I want to know. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.